Welcome back, STS Nation, and thank you to everyone watching and listening in on YouTube or audio. This is the Geographic Profiler podcast, and I am Douglas McGregor. Today is the first episode where we focus directly on geographic profiling, but I get to be a listener along with the rest of you. Adam Marsden from the Australian Federal Police, or AFP, is with us today. Adam is a forensic intelligence analyst specializing in geographic profiling. His work focuses on serial crime and active and cold cases spanning various crime types. Adam is the only full-time geographic profiler working directly with law enforcement in Australia. In addition, he is an educator, trainer, artist, published author, and has recently started his PhD. While there are a lot of similarities in what Adam and I do, our professional journeys, activities, resources, and the environment in which we operate are quite different. Adam, it's always great to see you, and thank you for joining me here today.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it.
No, it's great to have you. You're a friend, a professional colleague, and someone that is in the same field as me. So it's always great speaking with you. How did you become a geographic profiler?
It was a bit of a journey for me, actually, because when I was studying Masters of Fraud and Financial Crime, of all things, there was a little segment in there that spoke about serial crime and how there were different techniques of addressing serial crime. One of those techniques was geographic profiling, but it was only a paragraph within a subject within a course. So I got a little bit curious as to what geographic profiling was and started digging a little bit deeper and came across Kim Rosmo's work. And that just sort of encouraged me to see what sort of courses are available. And it just so happens there were none in Australia at the time. So I took it upon myself to get across to the United States and undergo the geographic profiling training. And then when I came back here, started implementing it across law enforcement.
Nice. And what does the geographic profiling training involve? What does it involve? At least the route that you took?
Yep. So the basic training is run by a company from Canada known as ECRI. So they host what's known as a geographic profiling analyst training, level 1 and level 2. Level 1 is more your theoretical based work and really laying the foundations and understanding of what geographic profiling is. Whereas a level 2 work sort of steps into that operational side where you start employing some of those strategies and the theories to actual case work. At the tail end of that, to become certified, you need to do a case and get it assessed by either the trainer or a mentor. But that could take anywhere from a week up to 6 months. So you sort of really need to go back home and assess what you've got. What sort of serial cases are available. By the end of the GPA2 course, you're really only certified to conduct analyses on property crimes. So my journey didn't stop there. I continued on and started researching different aspects of psychology, the environment. I've done a postgrad in forensic psychology and also an honours where I looked at the environment and how that influences offender decision-making in body disposal cases. So my journey definitely didn't stop at that. And I'm never happy stopping the sort of academic side of the house. I'm always learning.
So ECRI, they're pretty much the leader in geographic profiling training worldwide, I would say.
Definitely.
I mean, I know it's offered at other institutions as well, academic institutions, but privately, they're probably the leader.
Definitely the leader, and the one that sort of hosts the national recognition for becoming a geographic profiler. So it was sort of the standout for me to go to and learn this trade. But you'll see some industry will sign into, or not sign into, but and join forces with ECRI to encourage that growth of geographic profiling. So you'll see universities in the US, and I think the one that I was with was University of California, Long Beach. I think it's going back a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think when it comes to Australia as well, it's really on me to make sure that growth continues, because ECRI have given me the approval to be their trainer and representative in Australia to ensure that geographic profiling, the knowledge and the practice keeps growing, and it's got a standard that it hits every time.
And so before you, there was no geographic profiling capability in Australia.
No. There were people who had done the training, but there was never a capability that got up and running. I think it was a combination of drive and determination on my part, but also the moons lining with certain people in positions that were able to approve and get things going. I think the strategy that I used, which I've published as a chapter in a book called The Crime Analyst Companion, was to actually get cases where we could prove the worth of geographic profiling before we actually pitched it back to management, so they could see the value in it. And then once we had those use cases, we could open up a couple of cases that were active and use it on there to show them how it would work in a real life scenario. So they got the benefit of seeing how it works before they actually said yes to anything.
So when a law enforcement agency is looking to launch this type of program and bring these capabilities in, what do they need to see when you say to prove that it's worth having this capability? What are they looking for as a larger agency?
From an Australian perspective, at least I can talk to, is that generally they've already had experience with me or someone who was working on my team at the time. So we were able to at least demonstrate the value in it. And one of the cases that we'll likely talk about later is one that was a huge success, but it also drove that agency to request a training package that I could deliver them. So now we've gone from myself, who was trained, and we had 3 geographic profiling analysts at the basic level. We've gone in Australia up to 10 now. So over the last year, we've tripled our capacity, and then we've got a few more that are going through their certification process as well. And this year, I probably estimate that we'll have 1 or 2 courses running as well. So the growth is going to keep stepping up for us, which is great. It sort of lightens my workload a little bit from the serial property crime perspective, where I can start focusing more on the heavy duty work.
And are the other individuals that are learning the geographic profiling in Australia, are they crime analysts, intelligence analysts first with that skill set now?
There's a combination of everything. I don't really restrict it to whether it's a police officer or a crime analyst. What I do sort of put a caveat on is that they need some law enforcement experience. They can't just be fresh out of college or fresh into the organization. They need at least 5 years exposure to serial or violent crime. So there's a pretty good vetting process in place to see who gets onto these courses. Not only do we teach the proper methods and make sure that we're hitting the standards are already met from a crime analyst or a police officer perspective before they're even getting in there. And we also want to make sure that the people that we're taking on the course, at the end of it, we're going to get the biggest bang for buck as well. They're not just going to learn this, get their certification, and then put it in the back drawer and never use it again. We want to make sure the people that are coming on our courses will get that exposure over and over again. So the people who we do train are going to be leading, at least in Australia, but potentially in the Southern Hemisphere as well.
Do those individuals need other skill sets first? Do they need other knowledge first, such as crime mapping or knowledge of software, or can they jump right into doing this training for geographic profiling?
That's a really good question. There's a couple of aspects to that. Firstly, I think everyone who comes on board brings their own unique skill sets. We've had people who are interested in different crime types, which is good for me because, firstly, I don't get a lot of exposure to arson offences. So anyone who has that arson experience and comes in and does the course teaches me as well. So there's that aspect of people bringing in their own skill sets. And I guess they don't. It's not a mapping course, so it's very much geo-profiling, looking at the theories, and then applying that to operational cases using a specific software known as Rigel. So they don't need to know anything about that, but what it does help to do is have basic knowledge of your PowerPoint and Word and all of those sorts of things. So you really want someone who's able to use the Windows suite and then apply that to their products at the end of doing the geo profiling. So yes, we can teach them how to do the geo profiling, but to make a product at the end of that, an Intel report or an intelligence bulletin, which goes into a massive assessment, we want to make sure that these people are accurate in their intelligence, but also creative enough to produce an image that says 1,000 words. So the officers, when they get that image, they know where to go, they know what they're looking for, and they know what to do to catch that particular individual.
Having those analytical skills is very important.
Yeah.
I really want to come back to Rigel, the software, and some of the initiatives, but maybe first we should just go over, what is geographic profiling? Do you mind just giving us an overview of what it is as a field?
Yeah, for sure. And what I generally present is that it's a subset of criminal profiling, and where criminal profiling sort of looks at that psychology behind the offender and the victimology and everything. The main purpose of the geo profiling is to look at the where and the when. So we're looking at the spatio-temporal factors in relation to the offences, and that generally tells a story about who's doing what and where. That leads into things that we can do where it becomes most efficient when we have an unknown perpetrator of offences, when we have a known suspect but we don't know where they are, or whether we've got a long list of suspects which need to be prioritised against a geographic profile. So it gives us the biggest bang for buck in respect of money, time and resources for police agencies, and then putting them in the right place at the right time to use those strategies that we put forth in our intelligence products.
What types of cases do you frequently work? You mentioned the serial cases, and there's quite a few cases that fall into that category. So what are some types of the serial cases that you've seen, and what other types of cases do you apply geographic profiling to?
Yep. So the majority of the cases fall into two brackets for myself. Half of my time is usually spent with serial crime, and serial crime can cover everything from burglaries, stolen motor vehicles, graffiti, stolen garden gnomes in one case, arson offences, and all the way to sexual assaults. And then on the other side of the house, we can have what the majority of my research and work is no-body homicides. So those cases where our police partners have located the offender or know who the suspect is, but the victim of the homicide is nowhere to be found. So we assist police in narrowing down key priority areas that they need to search to. We don't say this is where the body's going to be, but we say this is where evidence may lay in relation to the offence. So we've had some successes in that as well. But both of those sorts of aspects sort of take up 50% of my time each. With the rollout of this training, it's sort of lightened my serial property crime aspect to it. So now my key focus can be on providing those forensic analytical skills and GP to the no body homicides across Australia.
Every geographic location is a little bit different. In Australia, is there one particular serial property crime that's a big issue? For example, auto theft or ATM theft or robberies.
Yeah, it'll change over time. Really, I can only talk about the ACT, and what we generally see is either the burglaries or the stolen motor vehicles, and lots of young recidivist offenders. So it's usually rotating. If they're arrested and put into jail, you'll see a lull in a certain crime type, and then as soon as they're out, it'll just step back up again. But because ACT is pretty unique in that it's the landlocked state, or the territory. So we're totally surrounded by New South Wales, which means there's a lot of people that come in from New South Wales to offend in the ACT as well. There we are, just down on the right-hand side there, about 3 hours south of Sydney. That'll give you some sort of feeling for how far everything is in Australia. So that sort of trip down from Sydney to Canberra is 3 hours. Yeah, so the property crimes in Canberra are generally burglary and stolen motor vehicles.
And the map helps for all our non-Australian viewers. I think everybody knows where Australia is for the most part, but its geography and its borders is we're not all familiar with. So this helps. I like this one, and I think you know why. I was actually born in Vanuatu, so I've only been to Australia once, and it was just as a baby when we were flying back from Vanuatu to Canada. We had to stop in Australia, obviously, before flying out with the software. So where does the software come into play with geographic profiling?
So when we start looking at linked offences, and I must talk about forensics here because it's a great little starter or instigator for our investigations, because we have the full gambit of forensics under our belt. So we're able to link the crimes, or the crimes come to us already pre-linked because of fingerprints or DNA or shoe marks, etc. So we're able to use that as an initiator for our investigations. But what we need is minimum of 5 crime site locations, and there's a range of reasons for this. The main one is that the accuracy of the profile starts getting useful at 5 crime site locations. So we set it as a minimum of 5 crime site locations linked to one offender. So there's a number of assumptions as well that we need to make sure are not breached, but if they are breached, the reasons why they are. So if there's more than one offender, though, they need to be living in the same location or close by. So once we've got those 5 crime site locations, we place them into Rigel, which makes the calculations based on 2 aspects. So there's a big underlying formula for the software itself. One of the key aspects is what's known as a buffer zone. So the buffer zone is the minimum distance that someone wants to travel before they start offending. And the buffer zone's there usually because they don't want to be caught by people that know who they are. So if they're leaving somewhere, if they're leaving from a home base, for example, what's known as a hunting method, they'll keep gaps around their neighbors, they'll keep gaps around the barber or the shops that they go to because they don't want to be recognized by someone if they're conducting offences. And then the further they get away from their search base or home, the fewer offences occur, because what we start seeing is what's known as distance decay, and that's built into the formula as well. So I like to call it the laziness principle, but it's the least effort.
Mm-hmm.
They want to get to the place where they have a suitable target which meets certain criteria as well. But they don't want to go any further than that. So you start seeing a big spike just after the buffer zone, and then it'll start smoothing out towards as they move further away from their search base. And that's basically how Rigel works. So it starts overlaying those structures and the mathematical formula to give you what looks like a hotspot. But the hotspot is generally a cluster of similar offences. This is not a hotspot. This is showing you a probability area of where the offender's search base is.
So you mentioned having 5 cases. What do you do if you have say 3 cases that you know are linked? Do you start without Rigel and then move to it once you have 5? How do you go about that?
Usually, if there's 3, we can find more in our system. We're not limited. So if we're looking at a stolen motor vehicle series and there's only 3 in the series so far linked through fingerprints, for example, those stolen motor vehicles are taken from somewhere. So we've got a location, and then we've also got a dump site potentially. But we've also got sites like if they're youths, they tend to go to McDonald's and buy chicken nuggets. So we'll have locations that we can use that are linked to the offences, where we can build a better picture of who these people are. So we're not limited to just the offences that we're looking at. So stolen motor vehicles, for example. If a burglary takes place, for example, and they've stolen the car from there, but they've also taken credit cards, then we're also looking at potential frauds that have taken place as well. So we can use those as crime site locations because we know they were stolen at the same place as that car, which is linked to the 3 other cars.
When it comes to location data that you're putting into the software, you're putting in crime scenes, dump sites, vehicle dump sites, I assume. Are you putting in other location data as well, like anchor points, routes traveled, that kind of thing?
So Rigel will put in the crime site locations and also the suspect locations, because what it does is prioritizes your suspects according to the geo profile. Where our forensic analyst side of the house comes in, that's when we can start adding the extra features to our analysis. So some of the mapping stuff that I do, I add those extra features in there just to tell a story to our general duties officers who are out and trying to catch these perpetrators.
One other question I have with Rigel, because I don't really talk about it too much, is a jeopardy surface. Does Rigel, well, maybe you can explain to us a little bit what a jeopardy surface is, and does Rigel have that function as well?
Rigel does have that function. We don't teach it in detail on the courses. We say it exists. The jeopardy surface is really just a 3D image of what you look down at the top down. So if you picture the map that has that peak profile area, or the hotspot as I described it, but it's not a hotspot. If you turned that on the side, it starts looking like mountains. And what you can see is the peaks and troughs, which allow you to really pinpoint where you need to prioritize your search areas. So the jeopardy surface is really just a 3D image of what you would see in a 2D map.
So looking at your initiatives and your training throughout Australia, you're training law enforcement, I think you're in some of the academic institutions as well, teaching some of the students.
Just from last year, we got permission from ECRI to deliver GPA 1 to academic institutions. And that's because it's a real academic theory focused course. I saw the benefit there because we had several criminology students coming to us and asking for internships. and there's some issues behind getting interns across from a security perspective. So my initiative was to go out and actually deliver the course to the students so they didn't have to come to us. But the tail end of the benefit there is that when they do come to us, they're already GPA 1 qualified, which saves us money. So we're able to put them through the GPA 2 and then have them certified. So it's a smaller cost for us at the front end.
Yeah, I actually took my GPA 1 at BCIT in British Columbia, British Columbia Institute of Technology, and it was taught by Carl Cecily of the RCMP. It's a fantastic course. What's the scope of where you've expanded so far in Australia? How many law enforcement agencies? You mentioned 10 individuals, but how many law enforcement agencies have this capability now?
Really, the capability is only hosted by the Australian Federal Police. Even so, I've only just certified someone from another state as of yesterday. So we've got one in Northern Territory, one in Victoria, and several in ACT or AFP. I've done work for every state and territory across Australia, so they're aware of the work of GeoProfiler and what we do. But we've had interest from Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland to get on our courses as well. So I think any courses that do run, what we will do is just hold positions for each of the states and territories and offer out, so they can at least get one or two people into our courses.
I don't know the whole structure of law enforcement in Australia myself, but the AFP, Australian Federal Police, what's their jurisdiction?
So we've got two jurisdictions. One, ACT, so we look after the Australian Capital Territory and its linked territories. So you start looking at Jervis Bay and Cocos Keeling Islands, some of the other islands around Australia. So we have jurisdiction under the ACT government. And then we're also the Commonwealth Police Agency. So the Australian Federal Police looks after Commonwealth offences across Australia. Your Commonwealth offences are generally large drug offences, money laundering, counter-terrorism, but we've also got a range of Commonwealth offences that we look after. And over time, we have different priorities that Australia needs to look at as well. So counter-terrorism is always high on there. But the other aspect of that is that it may be a state-based offence, and it may come to our jurisdiction if it has a Commonwealth aspect to it. So when we start looking at people who go in to conduct frauds and get a fake license, but then they book a plane ticket with that fake license, becomes a Commonwealth offence. So we've got a state-based offence with a Commonwealth aspect to it.
If another law enforcement agency in another jurisdiction needs your assistance, needs your help on a case, what do they do? Do they call you up? Are you able to join in those cases if you're invited in?
Yep, we generally wait now until we've been given an invite to come in and have a look at a case. I'm aware of a lot of cases that are around. However, my workload is substantial already, so I'm not going to contact the investigator and say, hey, this is the service we provide. Would you like assistance? We wait for the invites to come through now. So there's actually online forms that our state and territory counterparts can apply through. It goes through a priority process, and obviously you can see how priorities might work. If there's two referrals that come into us for assistance and one's a property crime versus one's a serial homicide, we're going to take the serial homicide because of the risk to society. So we work on that sort of priority system. And then once again, if there's two sort of similar cases of property crimes, we start looking at the difference between how many crimes are included in that series. So if they're both burglaries and one of them has 5 crime site locations and the other one has 20, we're going to take the one with 20 first because it's more prolific. And then we take more recent versus dated as well because it's active. And depending also on the priority of the government at the time, it may become a priority for the organisation. And that's when we prioritise those jobs over as well. We generally don't say no to referrals. We just say we're going to have to push back for another 3 months or 6 months before we can have a look at this.
So you're constantly triaging.
Constantly triaging. And I mean, the amount of cases we've got on the go at the time is I can't even keep count anymore. It just keeps coming in and flowing out.
How do you find any time for cold cases? That must be with that many cases coming in.
I generally have one cold case on the back burner and just chip away when I can get in and get a bit of breathing space. But generally, it's usually those active cases that we jump into and assist our state and territory stakeholders.
So obviously, you're taking this initiative. You're the lead on spreading this capability within Australia, but you're also in the greater region as well. I know that you've provided some training in Pakistan, is it? So
yeah,
in the
that's
greater
right.
region?
Yeah, so the Australian Federal Police has a liaison network across the globe, essentially, and I think I saw a map that you brought up earlier.
Yeah, let me bring it up here. And quickly, I love this map because it right here it shows how different we see geography just on a global level, right? Because this isn't what a map in North America looks like. But in Australia, this would be your primary global map. It's just oriented differently.
That's right. Yeah, it's sort of got Australia smack bang in the middle there for you, but it's a good indicator of where we have our liaison network across the globe, and that provides a number of useful services for us, and also the jurisdictions that they operate within. In this particular case, I was reading on geographic profiling, and as I do, I continually surf for articles that are coming out. And there was one by the Pakistan, the Punjab Forensic Science Agency, where they said they caught a serial killer using geographic profiling. I thought this is pretty interesting. And then in reading that article, discovered that they really didn't have a geographic profiling capability. They just drew big circles around where the offences were and then did a DNA dragnet of the males that fit the description of the offender and caught the offender. But that came at a huge cost, as you can imagine, DNAing a whole slab of people in a specific area. So my pitch through the liaison network was to deliver this training for the Pakistanis and get them a bit more savvy with the theories behind it so they could save money on their investigations, but also to have a more targeted approach to their serial crimes. So that was my 2022 journey across there and delivering that course for the week.
And how did you find that? How did you find teaching some of these foreign agencies geographic profiling? Was it received well? Were they interested in it? Did they take it in?
It was definitely well received, and it was a massive eye opener for me. The amount of work that these guys do is just phenomenal, and as you can imagine, you have that. Pakistan is just busy with the homicides, the sexual assaults. So these guys are at the top of their game with their forensic and investigation. But they just needed those little strategies behind to become more focused in that. But they were very engaged and very smart. So it was such a great little experience for me over there.
There probably is such a demand for what you do on the training side to come into all these countries that Australia has relationships with to conduct this training. Are there plans in the future to work with more agencies, more countries?
Oh, look, there's never any plans. These things just sort of come about by way of people become interested, and then it sort of generates a bit of speed. and we're constantly getting requests from our state and territory counterparts in Australia to either present on the skill set and the capability, or deliver some training so they can get on it and get trained into it. In regards to the overseas aspects, there's really no plans, but there's always that availability for them to reach out to me and say, hey, can you come across and deliver the training? We've got a class of 20 ready to go for you. So there's always those opportunities, and I guess the first step there is reaching out to myself, and then I can put you in contact with the right people to make that happen.
Let's get into the serial crime side of it, the serial property offenses, and discuss a case that you sent me here. Why don't you kind of walk us through how a serial property crime works, and kind of, where do you start, and where do you start applying GP, and just kind of the different steps that you might take in working a crime such as this.
Yep. This one was fairly unique. He was stealing tools from vans and utes that were parked in specific areas. So it was very targeted sort of property crime, breaking into those things. The general duties officers actually knew who it was, but they didn't know where he was. So I've made this template here, which is actually an image from the book chapter that I wrote in the Crime Analyst Companion. But the person that we were targeting at the time was at the top right of that. And the intelligence that we had at the time was that he was visiting one or both of these females. So you can see their residential addresses pinged on the map there as well. So when I mentioned at the start that geographic profiling is useful for finding the people who we know but we don't know where they are, or if we're prioritizing a list of suspects, this actual product that I wrote delivered on both of those. And you can see from the geo profile that the red area, and I have a reference point in there as well. It's a circle with the black marker in the middle. We use a reference point to direct our general duties or our uniformed police officers to get to a specific area to start enacting their strategies. In this particular case, we knew who the guy was, and the profile was pointing towards him traveling certain roads. So what the strategy there was to get a pattern of life before we knew what times he was coming through and when. So I said, let's put a number plate reader on the corner of that road. We knew the car that he was driving. So let's just ping it as it comes through and see what times he's out and about doing his thing. We had the general duties guys go out there to put the number plate reader out, and our offender drove past at the same time. So he was arrested on that day. And it's stories like that I like hearing, because it shows the value of geographic profiling, shows the value of the products that we push out from a forensic intelligence perspective, but it also shows that there's an element of luck in it as well. And for this particular guy, he was just unlucky that he was driving past at that time. But it also translates across to our spatio-temporal analysis as well. When we start looking at the time of these offences, at the time of any offences that take place, and there was a serial sex offender that I was looking at from another state, and we could say his offences are only occurring between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. on a Wednesday, so on majority on Wednesdays. So when we built our profile up, we were able to say, target this specific location between these times. And what that means for us is when we go to bosses in any of our organizations and we say, we need surveillance or we need general duties members to go to this area, they ask how long, because it's a cost to them. And when we can say we only need them for 3 hours on this night, they go, yeah, no worries, let's do this. And they made an arrest on that night when they sent them out to this specific location. So the value in really getting down into the analysis of the spatio-temporal it just shows the value at the tail end when you come through with these sorts of results. But yes, on the screen there is an example of what we call a geospatial intelligence report. And we have 3 levels of reporting. This one is the simple one that we can get out really fast to our general duties members. It shows them where and when they need to go and what strategies they need to use. The next step up is an intelligence report, which goes into a little bit more detail. And then finally, an intelligence bulletin, which really pulls apart all of the analysis work and describes how things are happening and what they need to do to address those issues.
With this geospatial intelligence report, what do these colors represent in this image?
You'll see on the right-hand side is a hit score. I generally don't use the term hit score anymore. I use it as a priority search area, and where we go towards the red, it's a higher priority search. So if you're using probabilistic search methods, you start at the red and then you work your way out to the cooler colors or down the graph on the right-hand side. And it gives you the highest probability of running into your offender for that series of offences. So we use that as the search strategy in these particular things, and that's how Rigel prioritizes your suspects against that map.
And you were mentioning that you give law enforcement strategies as well. So you're not just giving them the report and walking away. You're giving them recommendations, strategies, operational guidance.
Yeah, it's not
well.
just a request and we send out a form. I'll ring the investigators. I'll talk through the case. Where I can, I'll go out and visit some of the crime site locations. And a great example of that is when we were getting a series of offences where houses were being broken into, but they were Indian and Asian houses, and they were stealing money and jewelry. And my question to my offsider at the time was, well, how do you think they know these are Asian and Indian houses? And they couldn't answer it. I already knew the answer from the course that I did over in the States, but I said, let's go for a drive. So as we were driving by, you've got your things hanging on the doors. You've got the kitty in the window. You've got shoes out of the front. So all of these indicators can give you, or cues, can give our offenders an idea of who's actually residing in that premises and the type of offence that they're targeting. So there's value in going out and seeing those crime site locations as well. And Australia is pretty unique in that sense, where you don't really get a sense of how large a scale out in the wilderness is until you're out there. And looking down on a map just doesn't do it justice at all.
Visiting the sites, I find so critical, so important, and it's an exercise that I'm trying to do more and more with the cases I work. What else are you looking for? Like, say if you visit a crime scene, as opposed to someone's like you mentioned, a residence and how they're selecting that residence. If you're visiting a crime scene in a rural area, out in the bush, for example, what are you looking for as a geographic profiler?
Yeah, so it just depends on what sort of offence is there as well. One of the key ones is how do they get to that area and how do they leave? Where the course itself, the geographic profiling analyst course, teaches that the majority of people are hunters and they base their search from their home base. It's the opposite in Australia. Generally, people are commuting before they start offending in Australia. So we see a lot of people driving into a location before they start. And with the body disposal stuff, if they're using a car to dispose of a victim, the type of car itself can be a pretty good indicator of where they can go. So when we start looking at places like the Northern Territory, where a lot of it is outback, there's only a few roads, but if they don't have a four-wheel drive, they're very stuck to those roads. So we're able to narrow down search areas dramatically just based on the vehicle that this particular individual drives or has access to.
And this is why it's so important to have a geographic profiling capability in Australia, because as you mentioned before, and you've mentioned in some of your in your article about setting up geographic profiling in Australia, prior to you, it was outsourced to the Canadians and Americans, but they don't understand the Australian environment and geography as well as somebody who lives there would.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's not until you get here until you get that appreciation of what is actually available here. And something as simple as body disposal sites where you start looking at, well, where can we put this body if we're not going to drive it away from the crime site location? And if you're out bush, and I'm not sure whether every listener here would be aware of wombats, but the burrows are big enough for a man size to crawl through. So perfect space to drag a body down and dispose of. So these little features within the Australian environment play a huge role in where we can dispose of bodies and some of the environmental choices made by our offenders. It's one of the things I'm trying to teach any of the referrals that we get. I'll take our general duties guys out to crime site locations and put the geographic profiler hat on me and ask them questions so they can see what I look at when I see a crime site location. And a great example here is there was offences against a particular house, and the offender was poking holes in the water tanks. But my question to the general duties guys, when we walked behind the house, we couldn't see the water tanks. And I said, well, how do you think you knew the water tanks were there? And behind the house was actually a hill. So I said, let's see how far we need to go up this hill before we can see where those water tanks are. So we walked up the hill, and lo and behold, there's a depression in the grass there where this particular offender was likely staying to observe this premises before he attacked. So it's just a matter of putting a different spin on things and understanding what the environment's trying to tell us, and these cues that we see every day in our work, but they don't translate across to what we need to understand about a crime. But the more we do understand in this environment, the better action we can take as police officers, as intel analysts, as whatever work we're doing from that aspect. We can translate that across to actionable intelligence and then come up with better outcomes. And at the end of the day, if they're violent offences, what we're doing is preventing more victims, and even property crimes. We're preventing more victims, and that's the industry that. This is the reason why I became a police officer, is because I don't want people to have violence against them. I don't want them to become victims in any sense of the word. I want them to be in a safe place, and Australia is that safe place for me.
And you were a police officer first.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still a police officer and a detective. That was my build up to before I even started doing intel work and geographic profiling. I've been a police officer covering a range of offences as well. So I've done fraud for a long time, counter-terrorism, drugs. I worked as a detective in ACT as well, looking at the property crimes and the violent crimes and everything. So I've got a full range of experience under my belt in almost 20 years of policing.
I saw that you have a few other interesting activities there as well. From the bushfires to you were involved in the MH17 crash in Ukraine as well, in that investigation on some
Yeah,
level.
that's right. And I think that's one of the benefits of working in the Australian Federal Police as well, is that we're requested a lot for assistance in bolstering numbers or bolstering investigative capabilities across Australia. And that's what we're there for. We're here to assist our state and territory partners and stakeholders in whatever work they need done. And if we have the capability, then we're only too happy to assist in those sorts of matters. Where it becomes that international aspect as well, we can be requested on jobs like MH17. And I was one of the fortunate ones to go across there and do some work for MH17 investigations. So it's really valuable work, and I do get a buzz out of doing everything that I do from a police officer and an intel perspective.
Before we move on to discussing no body homicides, you mentioned that most of the cases in Australia involve commuters. What's a commuter as opposed to a marauder?
Yep. So you've got like you mentioned, the marauder or the hunter, and the other part is the poacher or commuter. Both of them specifically go out to search for their targets. the hunter or marauder starts their search from their home base, whereas the commuter will travel somewhere first before they start their criminal search. So what you see in a geo profile is not a residential address, but you might see a cafe at some shops, you might see an exit to a highway, you might see an office building or a park. So it's really incumbent on our geo profilers to read into what we're seeing, and knowing that our environment is a little bit different to the US, for example, where you've got residential and businesses almost universally spread across the map in the US, whereas Australia's population is generally around the coastlines and we don't see anything internally. So even just looking at it at that macro level, our environment is just totally different in that aspect. So we do we see a lot more commuters because people have to get to a location. They like living out of the city, but if they need to offend, they have to come into the city to do specific offences. So there's a lot more what we call target backcloth issues. And a target backcloth is just the availability of a specific target on the map. So you think of it this way, where residential addresses are universally spread, so our offenders have a really good choice of where they go. If they were targeting something like a McDonald's, there's fewer McDonald's around, so they have to go to that location before they offend. Or if they're targeting a red light district, they have to go to that area before they start offending. So there's a few more target backcloth issues that we need to negotiate around when we start thinking of strategies in Australia.
As a geographic profiler, how do you go about working a no body homicide case? I know they're really big in the news here in North America lately, working a lot of cold cases, but also just with all the access to information that offenders have for forensic countermeasures, forensic awareness. It seems like no body homicides are becoming increasingly popular. So how would you go about working one of these cases?
And I mean, you hit the nail on the head. They are increasing, and I think Australia is a really good example where you don't have to drive too far before you start reaching places that are heavily bushland or in the outback, for example. Don't have to travel too far before you've got a really good body disposal site. But this example here is one which was referred to me. Where a group of people went out drinking one night. Someone owed someone money, so they decided to bash him a little bit for it, and then start trimming off toes and torturing him over time. And then made the decision to murder this particular individual. So when we first got the case, what the strategy I like using is what I call start wide, finish tight. So we'll draw in witness statements, CCTV, telecommunications, anything we can get our hands on to say what's the big area that we're looking at, and then what can we use to draw that down. Is there a time where a vehicle's past the CCTV? What does that mean before the previous time? How long do they have to travel there? So we get it down to a specific area. And then once we get down to an area, I start using our strategies for geo profiling. If they've got a four-wheel drive, can they go off-road? If they don't, they need to stick to the roads, which means we can narrow down a particular area or prioritize an area. Then another question I ask is not what can they do, but what can't they do? So is there any physical barriers or environmental barriers in that area which is preventing them from doing something or disposing of this victim? In this particular case, there was a large fence line around, and you'll see the red line around there. So I don't say you can't search there or you can't go there. What I do is give it a lower priority search. So our green is our high priority search areas, and you'll see I've targeted areas that are sort of 20 meters off a road or within a bush line. And you can see little dirt tracks around that specific area as well. The box at the top right there was a cemetery. So nice little areas to dispose of your victim. So the agency that requested this assistance actually took this on board and did a line search of all the green areas and found nothing. So that was a bit of a a point of a sore point for me, where all of the data was pointing into this area. However, they got no result. But it was about a week later where more information came in and we changed our assessment. And that second assessment got an area where we did a geospatial intelligence report. I identified a reference point and the body was within 200 meters of that reference point. So we were able to get it down to a really nice, tight area. And I think it's sort of the environment that we're in. There's only really a couple of roads. And because this guy was driving a Ford Falcon and not a four-wheel drive or a 4x4, we were able to say he's sticking to the roads, which means we can narrow down this search area dramatically. But in this particular case, one of the offenders actually rolled on the rest of them and said, "Yeah, well, we murdered the guy. If you see the bottom line, so in the green area on the right-hand side where it sort of looks like a right angle, they actually murdered the guy in there. So somewhere in the bush there's a couple of toes that have been trimmed off our victim. So although they didn't find anything on the day, they weren't looking for toes. They were looking for a full-size body. So we weren't able to find that on the day. So now the question is, do we bother going back out there and look for metatarsals, or do we just say we've got advice from the offender to say that the murder has actually taken place in that location?
That's incredible. Within 200 meters.
Yeah, that's a really good success story, and I think it's a combination of the amount of information that we get from our referrers, the dedication of the detectives that work on these types of cases, and also the environment that the offence took place in. So it was sort of the trifecta for me, where we were able to get the information. We had a really good detective team working on the case. And the environment was very limiting on our offenders. So we were able to come up with a really good result for that one.
And after you identify these locations, what happens next? Is it canine teams, HRD teams? Is it GPR? What's the next step for law enforcement after you've identified potential areas?
So it really depends on the case once again, but generally you'll see the detectives team with search and rescue, and search and rescue follow their specific methods for searching areas as well. And then if the terrain's open like this, we might even use a drone to get current footage and see whether there's any change in vegetation for clandestine graves, for example. We can get, in some scenarios, motorcycles, the dirt bikes, or the police officers that ride horses. So we might get those sorts of search strategies out. If we know the victim, for example, has some sort of implant that's metallic, we can use GPRs. We can use metal detectors. So these sorts of strategies just depend on a case-by-case basis, and it's some of the things that we can have that discussion with our law enforcement partners and say, have you considered this, this, and this? Generally, they've already considered those points, but it's just something that I will pick up on the side as well. And in one or two cases, they say, yeah, we actually haven't thought about that one. Let's give that a go.
Yeah, that's amazing. Just it's a complete team effort, but you're such a critical part of that to narrow down areas like this that they might otherwise just not have identified.
Yeah, definitely a team effort, and I mean, I'm thankful that the detectives that I've worked with to date are very thorough in the work they do, and they're so dedicated to get a result in these types of offences. So, I mean, my thanks always goes out to the guys that are working these long hours and not seeing their families. So, and I've been in that position as well, so I know exactly what they're doing, and it sort of hits home for me as well when I get these cases that I want to put 110% into and not let that team down.
Before we finish off here, so you've now started your PhD. So
That's right.
you're taking your education to the next level to become a doctor. So tell us about that. What's your PhD in?
I might just start with my honours project, where I actually looked at the environment and how that affects offender decision making in body disposal and homicides. And part of that honours project, I noticed that there was sort of an inconsistency with how people describe the stages of homicide. My PhD is looking into the stages of homicide and body disposal, and really getting a focus on breaking down the different aspects of the stages and seeing what activities take place in there. So when we start looking at cold cases, for example, we can overlay that with the model or whatever I'm going to produce to say, here's where our gaps are. This is what we need to focus on. Or if there's evidence that we've sort of overlooked in the past because it doesn't sort of ring a bell for us, but it aligns with one of these stages of homicide, then it'll build a really good picture for us. And one of the things I did in the honors project was build a temporal timeline of homicide. So starting from the time of murder up until cold case, what in the literature is available to say, within 24 hours, the body's disposed of. What times do people dispose of bodies? What does it mean for investigators if an investigation goes over 96 hours? What types of environments are used within a specific time frame? So that template for the timeline is able to be used on timelines of homicides. So we can line it up and say, we've got this gap of telecommunications between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. What does that mean in our timeline? Well, it means it's probably your body disposal, because majority of body disposals happen between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. And more often than not, it's between midnight and 4 a.m. So we can start really narrowing down body disposal times and then refocus our investigations on, well, where actually were these people during that time period?
That sounds fascinating, and I can't wait to read your dissertation when you're done. Um, it's an exciting next step to take. I know doing a PhD is no easy task. It takes a while. It's a lot of hard work, and doing that on top of your duties right now, it's I'm sure it'll be quite time consuming.
I mean, it's my life at the moment. So, I mean, my PhD journey is aligning with my work life, which makes it a lot easier as well. But it also gives me a bit more of a thorough understanding and asking questions within these jobs as well. What's happening in this particular area? Why does this timeline not add up? But the education that you do on the side definitely weaves into the work that I do here, which means we're only just going to keep getting better results and be able to train our next line geoprofilers up to a point where I'm happy if I take a step back and let them do the work.
Just quickly to finish off, so you've brought geographic profiling into Australia. You've taken the lead on expanding the capability across the country. Uh, you're getting your PhD. So, what's next for GP in Australia?
That's a great question. What my projection is to develop a no body homicide course, so we can at least have a specific area that, because it takes up 50% of my workload, it's obviously a key area of interest for state and territory bodies across Australia. So what I want to do is be able to create a course that's focused on the no body homicides, and one that may incorporate some geoprofiling theories and concepts, but mostly it's going to be there to aid our detectives doing their courses, doing their investigations. So I want to make sure that we're not just building our next generation of geoprofilers, but also housing some level of capability within our detectives that are constantly undergoing these jobs. So um, their experience is just going to feed into this, but the course itself is just going to be based off the research and the work that I've conducted over the years of having this capability. And I still want to keep pushing it through our universities, so we can get our criminology or our STEM students essentially really interested in this field, because I think it's that next generation that needs to build the interest into these areas. And if we can start the training early, there's going to be more talk about it. I don't need to advertise. It's going to be advertised amongst the student bodies. So I think driving that through more than just one university would be a great step within Australia. But like I said before, I'll make myself available to anyone who does want to reach out and engage with us about training or development. And then we talk about next steps from there.
I would love to see more geographic profiling, worldwide, but in the different academic institutions, police foundation programs. So it really sounds like you're taking that to the next level, and I think that's absolutely incredible. If you want to reach out to Adam, his X account is right there. You can also find him on LinkedIn as well. Just finishing off on a lighter note, you're a police officer, intelligence officer, geographic profiler, but you're also an artist.
Yeah, well, I try to be. I like to paint, and I use that to sort of degas the brain a little bit from the work that I do. So just take a little bit of a step away. But that also just started because I have a 9-year-old son who came home from school one day, obviously after an art session, and said, "Dad, can we do some painting?" And I'm like, "Yes, if we're going to do it, let's do it properly. Let's get some paints and some canvases and see what happens." And it turns out I enjoyed it, so I just kept going, and I've got a couple of paintings that are up available for purchase, but I've only just sold my first one. So
congratulations, you're a professional artist,
I'm
right?
a professional artist now. Yeah. Thank you.
That's amazing. And everybody needs something like that, right? To decompress and take their mind off of their work. And but that's amazing that you've taken that up, and that you're now a professional artist.
Yeah, it's definitely not a side hustle level yet, but I mean, I'll keep it as a hobby, I think.
Great. That's great. So Adam, this says it's been an intriguing discussion, and thank you for shedding some light on the field of geographic profiling. I really look forward to having you back on in the future to share your academic research as you progress through your PhD and casework. Hopefully down the road, there's some cases that you can share with us and kind of give us a more inside glimpse into geographic profiling. Thank you, all of STS Nation. Please like and subscribe, comment, and share. The Geographic Profiler is a Surviving the Survivor production, and you can find more great episodes on YouTube at STS Talk. Again, thank you, Adam. Thank you, viewers and listeners, and stay safe.
Thanks so much.